I had told myself this trip was about clearing my head, about shutting out the noise of everything waiting for me back home. Work had been eating me alive, and the ache of my last relationship still lingered like smoke after fire. But as soon as we stepped off the trail and into the hush of the woods, I realized this camping trip was about more than escape. It was about Sawyer. He was the kind of friend who never let silence settle for long. On the drive up, he kept the conversation moving effortlessly, throwing out stories, half-remembered songs, and ridiculous jokes. I smiled, laughed, even when my chest felt heavy. That was Sawyer's way. He made you forget the weight you carried, even if only for a while. By the time we found a clearing to set up camp, the sun had begun to dip low, staining the tree-lean gold. I dropped my backpack with a groan of relief, brushing pine needles from my hands. Sawyer tossed his own pack down and stretched with a grin. "This is it," he said, scanning the woods like he'd discovered treasure. No neighbors, no phone service, no responsibilities. Just us and the stars. Just us. The words echoed strangely in my head, though I shook them off and busied myself with the tent poles. He worked beside me, quick and capable, humming under his breath. I'd always admired how at ease he seemed in the world, how little it seemed to demand of him. Beside him, I felt restless, my mind forever snagged on questions and doubts. As we set up the campfire, Sawyer spoke about the trips we used to take in college, back when neither of us had anything to lose. I remembered those days vividly. Long nights with nothing but laughter and whispered dreams, mornings when the future seemed like something we'd invent together. Somewhere along the way, life had sharpened its teeth on me, but Sawyer seemed untouched. "You've changed, Colton," he said suddenly, breaking the quiet as sparks crackled in the fire pit. "Not in a bad way, just heavier. You carry everything now. I miss the version of you that used to let go." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I poked at the flames with a stick, watching the embers flare. Life doesn't exactly give me the option anymore. Sawyer tilted his head, studying me with eyes that always seemed to catch more than I wanted them to. "Maybe it does. Maybe you just forgot how to take it." I laughed lightly, though there wasn't much humor in it. "Easy for you to say." The fire crackled between us, the woods pressing in with their vast silence. I could feel something unspoken lingering in his words, some edge I wasn't ready to examine. So I shifted the conversation, asking about his family, his latest job, his plans for the year. He answered easily, but every so often I caught him watching me longer than usual, like he was waiting for me to ask the right question. When the fire finally burned down to glowing coals, we stretched out in the cool grass, letting the stars spill across our vision. The air smelled of smoke and pine, sharp and grounding. For the first time in months, I felt my thoughts loosen, untangling just enough to make room for the present moment. Sawyer lay close enough that our shoulders brushed. Neither of us moved away. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was just the natural closeness of two people who'd known each other long enough to skip the boundaries others clung to. But the longer we stayed like that, the harder it was to ignore the tension building quietly between us. It hummed beneath the night sounds, beneath the rhythm of my own breathing. He turned his head toward me. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different?" I frowned slightly, my eyes fixed on the scattering of constellations above. "Different how?" "If we hadn't been so focused on chasing other people, other dreams. If maybe we'd noticed what was right in front of us." The question hung heavy in the air. I could feel my pulse quicken, though I forced myself to stay still. This was Sawyer, reckless, bold, often careless with words. But something in his tone told me he meant this. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the sudden tightness in my chest. "I don't think I follow," I said carefully, though I knew I did. Sawyer didn't press. Not yet. He just let the silence stretch until it felt like it might split me open. Then he laughed softly, as if to shake off the weight of what he'd said. "Forget it. I'm just talking too much, like always." But I couldn't forget it. The words clung to me, sharp as burrs, and as we crawled into the tent later, the air between us felt charged, almost fragile. I zipped my sleeping bag, lay back, and closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. I kept replaying his voice, his eyes in the firelight, the nearness of him in the grass. There was something shifting, something dangerous pressing at the edges of our friendship. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew it had already begun. The night settled thick and still, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves beyond the tent walls. I lay in my sleeping bag, eyes open, staring into the dark. Sawyer's steady breathing came from just a few feet away, and the nearness of him only made it harder to quiet my thoughts. I wanted to pretend his words by the fire had meant nothing, that they were just a fleeting moment of sentimentality. But they weren't. I'd felt the weight in his tone, the way he lingered on me like a truth he could no longer contain. "Colton," he murmured suddenly, his voice soft, like he wasn't sure if I was awake. I rolled over slightly, enough to show I was listening. "Yeah." There was a pause, longer than comfortable, before he said, "Can I ask you something? And I need you to be honest with me." Something in his voice made my chest tighten. I nodded, though I wasn't sure he could see me in the dark. "Go ahead." He shifted on his sleeping bag, the faint sound of fabric against fabric. "Do you ever think about us? About what it would be like if we weren't just friends?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through everything I thought I knew. I blinked at the shadowed outline of the tent ceiling, searching for the right words, but nothing came easily. "Sawyer," I began, my voice rough. "We've been friends for years." "I know," he cut in gently, "but that's not what I asked." I sat in the silence, torn between the safety of denial and the danger of honesty. The truth was, I had thought about it, maybe not often, and maybe never seriously, but there had been moments, late nights like this one when our closeness felt like something more, when I wondered what might happen if one of us crossed the line. I'd always pushed those thoughts away, afraid they would ruin what we had. "I don't know," I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe. Sometimes." He let out a breath, not quite relief, not quite laughter. "That's more than I hoped you'd say." I turned toward him, though I could only see his silhouette in the dimness. "Why are you asking me this now?" "Because," he said, his words slow and deliberate, "life doesn't give us forever. We keep waiting for the right moment, for the perfect circumstances. But what if they never come? What if we just keep pretending, and then one day it's too late?" I felt my heartbeat in my throat, heavy and insistent. "Pretending what?" "That we don't feel it," he said simply. "That this, us, hasn't been more than friendship for a long time." The tent felt smaller suddenly, the air warmer, as if his words had shifted the very atmosphere. My mind raced through memories. The way he always found a reason to touch my shoulder, the way his laughter pulled me out of my worst moods, the way he looked at me tonight across the fire. Had I really been blind to it all? Or had I been too afraid to admit I'd noticed? Sawyer's voice dropped even lower, almost a confession. "I want to try, Colton. Just once. No labels, no promises, just to see what's there. Because I swear if I don't say this now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." I stared into the dark, my pulse roaring in my ears. His words weren't casual. They carried the weight of years, of feelings he kept hidden until this moment. It was reckless, and yet something in me wanted to believe him. But beneath that pull was fear. Fear of ruining everything, of opening a door that couldn't be closed again. Our friendship had been my anchor through storms, and I couldn't imagine my life without it. Could I risk tearing it apart for the chance at something more? "I don't know if I can," I said finally, my throat tight. He didn't move, didn't press. Instead, he whispered, "You don't have to decide tonight. I just needed you to know." The quiet returned, thick and suffocating. I lay there, staring at the faint outline of him in the dark, my thoughts a tangled mess. Part of me wanted to reach out, to close the distance and see if the truth he spoke lived in the space between us. Another part wanted to retreat, to bury this night and pretend it had never happened. Minutes dragged by, each one heavier than the last. I thought he had drifted off to sleep when his voice came again, softer than before. "Colton, if tomorrow you wake up and hate me for saying this, I'll live with it." But I couldn't keep pretending anymore, not with you lying just a few feet away. The honesty in his words pierced me, raw and unguarded. I didn't answer because I didn't know how. Instead, I closed my eyes and tried to breathe through the storm inside me. Somewhere in the darkness, I realized the balance between us had shifted forever. Whether I accepted the proposal or not, the friendship we'd carried for years would never be the same. Sleep came slowly, uneasily, with the echo of a confession replaying in my mind. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing between us would ever be simple again. Morning came with a chill that seeped through the tent walls, waking me before the light fully reached us. I lay still, listening to the rhythmic sound of Sawyer's breathing beside me, and tried to sort through the knots inside my chest. His words from the night before hadn't faded. If anything, they'd grown sharper in the silence of sleep. I rolled onto my side and watched him stir, hair messy, face relaxed in a way I rarely saw. He looked unguarded, almost boyish, and I wonder how long he had carried the weight of unspoken feelings. My instinct told me to pretend, to pick up where we left off yesterday, to ignore everything he confessed. But another part of me, the part that hadn't stopped replaying his voice, whispered that pretending wasn't possible anymore. He opened his eyes slowly, meeting mine without surprise, like he'd known I was watching. "Morning," he said, voice still rough with sleep. "Morning." I echoed. My throat felt tight. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I asked, "Did you mean everything you said last night?" Sawyer sat up, pulling his blanket tighter around his shoulders. "Every word." I nodded, staring at my hands. "And if I told you I'm not sure if I'm scared of what would do to us?" He leaned forward, his eyes steady, unwavering. "Then I'd tell you I'm scared too. But some things are worth the risk." The air between us thickened, charged, as if the trees outside were holding their breath along with me. My chest ached with the weight of choices I hadn't wanted to make. Yet even as fear pressed down, another truth pushed its way through. I wanted to know. I wanted to know what it would mean to cross the line. So I reached out, hesitant at first, until my hand brushed his. His fingers tightened around mine instantly, as though he'd been waiting years for that single gesture. The shock of warmth jolted through me, grounding and disorienting all at once. Neither of us spoke. The silence was louder than words, more binding than any promise. Slowly, he shifted closer, closing the distance until our shoulders touched. I could feel his heart beating quiet, fast and steady, mirroring my own. I should have pulled away. Instead, I let the moment stretch, let it wrap around me like something inevitable. When he leaned in, it wasn't sudden or demanding. It was gentle, tentative, as if asking for permission without words. And though my body tensed with nerves, I didn't stop him. The kiss was soft, careful, carrying the weight of years of silence and the risk of tomorrow's regret. It wasn't just a kiss. It was the unraveling of everything we had built on friendship alone. When we finally pulled back, I stared at him, searching his face for answers I couldn't find in myself. His smile was small, fragile, but real. "I've wanted that for longer than I can admit," he whispered. I swallowed hard. "Sawyer, what happens now?" He shrugged lightly, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Now we see where it goes. Or we don't. But at least we know." I lay back, closing my eyes, trying to steady the storm inside me. My chest burned with conflicting truths. I cared for him deeply, maybe more than I'd allowed myself to realize. But beneath that was guilt, a creeping sense that I had betrayed something sacred between us. The rest of the day passed in fragments. We cooked breakfast over fire, tried to hike a trail nearby, even laughed at some of the old stories Sawyer dredged up. Outwardly, things looked the same, but underneath, everything was altered. Each glance lasted longer. Each brush of his hand lingered. Each silence held a question I couldn't answer. By evening, the tension had thickened again. As the fire flickered low, I felt the weight of what we had done pressing down harder than ever. Sawyer seemed content, leaning back against a log, watching the flames like the world had just shifted in his favor. But for me, unease had grown sharper. I couldn't shake the thought that this wasn't just an experiment, not something we could tuck away when the trip ended. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Later, lie in the tent once more. Sawyer reached for my hand again, casual, familiar, like it had always belonged there. I let him hold it, though my thoughts churned with doubt. "You're quiet," he murmured, not accusing, just noticing. "I'm thinking," I admitted. "About us?" "Yes." He squeezed my hand gently. "Don't overthink it, Colton. Just be here with me. That's all I'm asking." I wanted to believe it was that simple, but my mind replayed the years we'd spent as friends, the promises unspoken but understood, the trust that had anchored us both. By giving in to this moment, had I betrayed all that, or had I simply uncovered the truth it was always leading to? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. So I stayed silent, staring at the tent ceiling while Sawyer's breathing slowed beside me. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under too, though my dreams were restless and tangled. When I woke in the middle of the night, his arm was draped over me, heavy and warm. The gesture was tender, instinctive, but it made my chest ache, because in that moment, I knew we had stepped into something neither of us could walk away from unchanged. And I couldn't shake the fear that in choosing to cross the line, I had set us both on a path that would end with betrayal. Dawn crept in quietly, painting the tent with pale light. I woke before Sawyer, his arm still resting over me like a claim. He didn't need to speak aloud. For a few minutes, I let myself stay there, caught between comfort and suffocation. It was easy to pretend, in the hush of the woods, that we were something certain, something real. But I knew better. The world outside the trees would not be so forgiving. Carefully, I shifted out of his hold and sat up. My chest felt heavy, as if the night's choices had settled like stones inside me. Sawyer stirred, stretching lazily before meeting my gaze with a slow smile. "Morning," he said, voice warm, hopeful. I forced a small smile in return. "Morning." We packed up camp in silence, though the silence was nothing like the ones we'd shared before. This one felt loaded, every movement a reminder of what had changed. I watched him move easily through the routine, folding the tent, tying down gear, whistling under his breath as though the world had shifted in his favor. I envied his certainty, the way he could embrace the moment without fear of its aftermath. For me, every glance at him carried both longing and regret. I couldn't escape the thought that I had betrayed not only our friendship, but myself. My need for clarity, for boundaries I had sworn to keep. Last night had been a collision of want and fear, but now it felt like a fracture that could never be mended. On the trail back to the car, Sawyer walked beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed now and then. Each touch sent a jolt through me, not of excitement, but of unease. He noticed my quietness. Of course he did. "You're miles away," he said gently. "I'm just thinking," I replied, keeping my eyes on path. "About us." His tone was cautious but hopeful. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, and—" I stopped walking for a moment, forcing myself to meet his eyes. They were so open, so certain, it almost hurt to look at them. "I don't know if I can give you what you're looking for, Sawyer. Last night it felt real, but it also felt like we crossed a line we can't uncross." His expression faltered, the first crack in his easy confidence. "You regret it?" The word stung, but I couldn't soften it. "I regret what it might cost us." We walked in silence after that, the air heavy with everything unsaid. By the time we reached the car, the weight of it had settled between us like a wall. The drive home was quieter than the drive up had ever been, filled with static from the radio and the unspoken truth that we couldn't go back to the way things were. When he dropped me off, he lingered for a moment, fingers tapping the steering wheel. "Colton," he said finally, his voice low, "I don't regret it, not 1 second. Even if you do." I opened the door slowly, the ache in my chest sharper than before. "That's the difference between us, Sawyer. You leap and I count the cost." His eyes searched mine, but whatever he hoped to find wasn't there. With a faint nod, he let me go. Days turned into weeks, and though we tried to keep in touch, our conversations grew strained, awkward. Where once there had been laughter and ease, now there was hesitation, careful pauses, words measured too carefully. I could feel him slipping away, or maybe it was me pulling back. Either way, The bond we'd carried for years was unraveling thread by thread. At night, I replayed the trip in my mind, the firelight, his voice in the dark, the feel of his hand in mine. Some memories filled me with warmth, others with guilt. Love and betrayal tangled together until I couldn't tell them apart. The truth I refused to say aloud was simple. I wanted him, but I didn't trust what wanting him had already cost us. And maybe that was betrayal in its purest form, not of him, but of what we had been before. Months later, when I finally saw him again at a mutual friend's gathering, the space between us felt vast. He smiled politely, and I returned it, both of us pretending we hadn't once crossed a line that changed everything. The conversation was shallow, safe, like strangers trying to find common ground. But in his eyes, I caught a flicker of the night in the woods, a memory we could never erase. As I walked away, I realized the proposal he had made was more than a question. It was a mirror, forcing me to confront parts of myself I had tried to bury. And though I hadn't given him the answer he wanted, I carried the weight of it still. The knowledge that sometimes love arrives not as salvation, but as a betrayal of everything you thought you could control. I don't know if Sawyer ever forgave me for hesitating, for pulling back after stepping forward. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself. But I know this. Under the stars and the silence of the woods, we became something we could never unbecome. And no matter how far I try to walk from it, part of me will always remember the night my best friend asked me to risk everything, and how I failed to choose either fully, love or loyalty. The story doesn't end neatly, because betrayal never does. It lingers, it reshapes, it leaves you carrying both a memory of what almost was and a regret of what can never be again.